about like things like surveys and like counting populations and demographics and stuff. So it's the
to do what? Yeah, I mean you're virtually there, but what does he propose that is done with that?
You can like control people by knowing more about them.
Biopolitical exploitation. That's a very, very good answer. Biopolitics refers to how we know about people and bodies, basically. Well, how do we know about things? Now, Michel Foucault in his work talks about how governments use bureaucracies to understand and know about who lives in their country. Yeah, so in this country, for example, we have the National Health Service, which is an arm of government, effectively, right? What does the National Health Service know about you, Ian? Well, it knows quite a lot about you. It knows how tall you are, it knows what colour your eyes are, it knows who your parents are, it knows when you were born, it knows your blood. You know what I'm getting at, right? There's a big data source there. Foucault's argument is that the state uses this information to control. That it weaponizes, if you like, that data to place disciplinary controls on society. It knows enough about people that it can keep us in check, effectively. Google's model is to do this in real time. To know as much about people who use its platforms and services as possible all of the time, so it can exercise control in real time by pushing people towards particular outcomes. So when you search for something on a Google search engine, I mean, there's an interesting thought experiment. It's kind of obvious. Mia, let's say we search for the same thing, right? Swansea University. Okay, so we just both put in Swansea University. You're signed in to your Google account, I'm signed into my Google account. Do you think we get the same results?
No.
Why not?
Because we look at different things.
We have a different history.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. Two people, I mean, you guys are broadly similar to one another. If you tried this, what will happen is on the first page of the Google search results, you're probably going to get really similar results. But as you drill down those pages, and most people don't go past like page 2 of the search results, right? If you go any further than that, you'll start to see wild divergences in the results themselves, because the results are tailored in order to attract you in different ways. Now, the big difference here would be if you were to compare results with me. I'm of a different generation. I have a longer association with the product, effectively. So they have a longer history of me as an individual there. And you will see divergences very quickly with me because I'm profiled in a very different way to you guys. So therefore, information is presented to me in a different way. But Google doesn't do it just to sell things. Google and their use of biopower, collecting as much information as possible about people at all times, real-time biopower, is there, and this is expressed in their aims as a company, to make the world more knowable. If you read Google's mission statement, it's there. Their aim is to make the world more knowable. It's right there in black and white. What does that mean? Knowable means controllable and predictable. If you can make the world knowable, as in you look for something on Google and that's the answer, that means that the world itself has become less unpredictable and has become less uncontrolled. In order to give a solid answer to a question at any given point, you need to control those variables. I mean, it's not facts necessarily we're talking about. Facts operate in a different way. But if you want to know opinion on something and Google can give you a solid opinion, it means that the world itself has become less unpredictable and more unchallenging. And Google's answer to getting to that state is to collect as much information as possible about every person that uses its services and anyone else that doesn't, in order to feed all that information into gigantic AI-based algorithms to try and predict what everyone's going to do all the time. You might think, whoa, that's not happening. Yeah, it's happening. During the pandemic, Google were using search data to predict how the pandemic would spread. They tried this years ago with flu information, and it didn't really work. And the answer to why it didn't work was they didn't have enough information. So they doubled down on how much information they could get. Their scoping of the pandemic was pretty good. They knew where it was going to spread, and they knew who was going to spread it. They knew who the high-risk people were. Not high risk in terms of getting the disease, high risk in terms of giving it to other people. They could predict with alarming accuracy how this was going to work. They haven't put any research papers out on this. Unsurprisingly, that information is worth a lot of money. But they're getting good at it. The reason why they're getting good at it, effectively, is because we keep on giving them information. We keep on giving them stuff. Has anyone else like me got an Android phone? Apple's really popular enough. They're no better, but Android phones, the operating system is Google. Globally, although it's not reflected in this room right now, but globally, Android phones are 85% of the smartphone market. There are more smartphones than there are people on the planet. So you already have the data collection covered in this sense, right? And Google spreads everywhere, as we know. So, the Google effect is to take that idea that I went over last week with Facebook and blow it up as far as you possibly, stick a gigantic pump in it and pump that balloon until it's going to burst. Basically, this is a form of solutionism. What Google proposes is that you can solve, and again, you're going to look at me like I'm bug-eyed here or something, right? And you think, nah, this can't be true. Google genuinely believes that you can solve all political, all social, all economic problems if you do two things. One, you're smart enough to create the right algorithms to solve those problems, and two, you have enough data. If you match those two things together, you can solve any problem out there. The sad thing about this is they're not the only ones that think that. The entire fundamental basis of Silicon Valley, and that area in America where people, you're right, been asleep or what? The fundamental basis of those companies that operate out of Silicon Valley is the same. We can solve the world's problems if you just let us. And the way you let us is forget about privacy, forget about the idea that you have a private world away from anything else. If you let us collect as much data as possible at all times, unimpeded, and let us just get on with it, don't interrupt our work, we'll solve all the world's problems. You think, what? No, this is true. And you might think, what the fuck, Leighton, has this got to do with YouTube? YouTube is the mechanism for getting that information. Okay? YouTube and TikTok, as I've already shown, is where we are. That's where our attention is. So if you want that raw material to do that, you've got to capture everyone's attention first and get that data together. It's no good having a really, and let's be fair, a really messed up idea if you can't execute it. But if you can execute it, then you can start to do this. And as Evgeny Morozov says, this idea is really, really bad. This is typical of the kind of thinking that comes out of Silicon Valley, where digital media can be the solution to every problem in the world. It can't be. One of the things that we're starting to finally cotton on to in this decade is that actually digital media is the root of a lot of the problems that we have in the contemporary world, not the solution to those. The solution cannot be the thing that caused it in the first place. That technological solutionism reimagines the individual and the social as part of the algorithms of the systems that have been made. There is no such thing as social. It is all just stuff that can be done in algorithms. There is no individual. That is something that can be put into an algorithm. That just makes these companies into gigantic control machines. And that's very, very problematic. And YouTube is critical to that. YouTube is absolutely fundamental to how Google sees that. So, let's take 5 minutes, and I mean 5, and then we start at 5 past. Caitlin had the right idea. She came in halfway through. She's missed the shit bit, and now she's getting to the good stuff. She's edited the world.
I guess I announced to you that I was going to say no one saw me.
No, it hasn't really.
I
I
was like, what is it? Sorry for I didn't tell that, I just like genuinely thought I was fine.
It's better to be there.
Yeah, sure.
Whole focus on
Yeah, say no, I'm not looking for that. I mean, like, for that,
if you have more week to make your designs, it's less job to talk. So I think just get all like designs done.
that's what I'm saying. He's like, oh,
Is anyone else under the impression, your opinion is very important on this, Abby, that we shouldn't be here this week? Because you were like, oh, I'm dying. Just now. Shouldn't we have a week off this week? Shouldn't this be a study week? Why don't we
we
have
don't
a
have
study
one this
Yeah, why
time.
did we have
week? I don't know. Sucks. I'm not into it. I need a week off. I need 8 hours of sleep a night. And like 8 in a day. And then I'm good. A study week teaching block 2 last year? I can't even remember. That's like sounds like about 10 million years ago now, but we did. Just slip in between invoices. We definitely. Did you get them in America? You get like reading weeks.
Usually, at least at mine, we have like spring break, which is just 1 week, which is for us is usually the week of St. Patrick's Day, so we don't have to do as much like.
Yeah, so like next week. Right?
Yeah, so next week that's ours, but and then maybe some like holidays we get like 1 or like an extended weekend, but.
Did you get anything in the autumn? So like, did you get anything in the autumn to break up that semester?
Yeah, we usually my school's in the fall break, so essentially spring break is in the fall.
The 8th of October time.
Yeah, and then usually we also get for Thanksgiving we get like half.
Of course, yeah. But that's like that's just Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, right?
Some universities do full week, but
It just seems like this is really long.
oh, it's way longer at my ours are like 14 weeks for lectures, and we like in the way instead of us like we have school like Monday, Wednesday, Friday for one class, or Thursday, it's like 2 days a week.
Yeah, this is too difficult. I'm tired. I need rest. And then I've got to mark all your assignments in. Son of a bitch.
I want to say, I think it's interesting that they're trying to do this, like, TikTok, when they've tried, Trump tried to do the same thing back, like, in early 2020.
Yeah. And they'll come back to it. I think it's one of these weird ideas that has some kind of political capital. Like, you know, it plays well to somebody. I don't know enough about American culture contemporary to know who it's playing to. But you don't come up with an idea like this unless somebody's been focused that this is a good thing to do, right? There's support for this somewhere. What's weird to me is it's bipartisan support. So I would get it if like you're MAGA, right, and you want to put a lot of the blame on contemporary American culture, on outside influences. I get why, you know, a Chinese on social media, because it ticks a lot of boxes. Right? Yeah, and there's precedent with COVID-19 as well, right? But I don't get how it's got bipartisan support. I'm not sure how that works. And you can't use that argument, really, that data is going to a potentially hostile foreign power when that's been happening since the start of the internet. So it's like, you know, you didn't really give a shit about this before, so why do you care now? But there is this sort of cultural, there's a cultural distancing going on between China and the US.
The Overton window in the US is like way to the right of us. Like, even Democrats,
I appreciate that.
To them, as like the centrist party would probably be to the right of
sure, but it's
most politicians.
But there's still distinct differences between the two parties.
Yeah,
but there's convergence on this issue, and it kind of looks towards this point where international relations are going repolarizing, and you're going to get weird things like this. But again, it's the extent to which you want to take this to its logical conclusions. If you know, American policymakers want to be serious about this point, well, you stop selling computers. And you stop selling phones instantly, because where are all these devices made? You know, if you really wanted to push this to the nth degree, you're going to create the conditions of an absolute. This isn't like a global downturn. This isn't like the economy going under like it did in 2008. You're going to have to restart the economy at that point. They're not going to be prepared to do that. Sensibly. I don't want that to happen because that would be disastrous. But then it becomes a weird part of this elongated culture. But the thing that confuses me the most of all is that you have a rapidly shifting demographic in the United States. Unlike Britain, which is becoming a really much older country, America actually isn't becoming that much older because of immigration. It's maintaining a young sort of profile as a country. That's really good for America, but this ain't going to play well with hundreds of millions of voters, but of course they're the least politically engaged, right? So there's calculations like this going on all over the place with this TikTok ban. The one thing I'm fairly certain won't happen is that this will happen. I'll stake my minuscule reputation on the fact that it won't get banned in the US. Because it makes too much money. You know, I don't know of any policy ever enacted by Congress or the presidency that says we're going to make less money. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. You know, that we're actually going to do something which is going to reduce the amount of money made by people who are citizens of this country. I can't think of anything since the 1920s when protectionism was a big thing which has ever done that. So, we're talking in the last 100 years basically. So I don't see it happening, but the rhetoric will keep going, that's for sure.
The cost benefit of AI and this TikTok getting a lot of data and making, China making, machines, an AI race, US versus China. Is it like related? But can you stop the flood of data to China?
No, is it? You can't. I don't know. I don't fundamentally know what the problem is with that because it's like, okay, well, we're coming to this 30 years late.
Yeah.
You know, if the Chinese government was being really serious about capturing information from the West, they would have been doing it for the last 30 years. They've been building every fucking piece of electrical equipment we've used for more than half a century. They would have already been doing this, so why now? You know? But it plays into this repolarization of the world around these poles of China, Russia, USA and the West.
But don't you think that in the capabilities of Silicon Valley that they'll just take a page from China's book and create their own version of TikTok, a more centralized version? where they can securely control all the information.
But it doesn't.
Because that's essentially what China does in terms of their version of Instagram, which is Weibo.
Sure. Well, they don't need to, right? I mean,
But if they're really, but
I mean,
that's sort of the alternative.
are you saying why isn't there a Western TikTok?
Yeah.
Well, I still think underlying all of this stuff going on about saying we're going to ban TikTok is an underlying principle that will go away the minute the ByteDance sells TikTok to a Western country or to a Western media company. Now, a valuation of 400 billion, surprisingly, there's not anyone who's willing to pay anything more. That's beyond even Google and Facebook at that point, that valuation. But if you can pressure ByteDance into saying, we're going to segment the American market and pass it over to an American company, then you can engineer a sort of a different relationship with how the data is used in it.
Right.
I'm still fairly convinced that's what they're trying to do here. But if I was ByteDance, I'd just tell them to fuck off. You know, why should this product that we've created, it's our intellectual property, just be handed over to an American company?
Would you think that they would never do it, right? They would never sell it.
It's not in their interest to do it.
Exactly. Like, it's not about money, it's about the whole concept also behind it.
It is, and there's really important principles about intellectual property at play there, which is way beyond this module, by the way. But I think they're fundamentally important in terms of who develops social media. Do we want a like state-sanctioned Facebook model where basically Facebook waits for something new to come along, sees if it's any good or not, and then just buys it, and then becomes this huge monopoly company on the basis of it has more money than anyone else, so we can just buy everyone else out? If that happens with TikTok, basically that's been given a rubber stamp of endorsement by the American government. I don't think that's a good. That's a horrible sort of idea of how social media should work. Because at the end of the day, the core thing in social media is us. And if that's how the government foresees how these things should be regulated and run, that's a very dark, depressing way of looking at us as individuals. Yeah, sure, I can see there's problems with the way TikTok operates, but I don't think those problems are any worse than how the rest of social media operates. They're just different problems. They're not fundamentally worse. You may say, okay, the Chinese government is right. Yes, I have significant problems with the way that China is run as a country and the Chinese government. Guess what? I have significant problems with the way Britain is run as a country and the British government, and the way America is run as a country and the American government. I have problems with all those entities. They just, don't get me into a moral relativism about China. There's nothing perfect about any of these other places either. But yeah, if you allow that to happen, something very, very dark is going to happen, where you basically, social media becomes a conduit of the American state. Nobody wants that, because that's exactly what you're saying is happening in China. So there's something. It's kind of dark, I think, this whole thing. Okay, so how do we conceptualize us in these platforms? Classically, we use this prosumer position. I'm sure you're all familiar with the term prosumer. It's a combination of producer and consumer. So we are empowered on these platforms to both produce and consume, and importantly, alter the meaning of text through our participation with text on these platforms. John Fiske called this audiencing in the 1980s, the idea that audiences are empowered to create new meanings for texts in different ways by their comments, by how they view things. I think Fiske's idea of the word audience here needs to be taken out. I don't know if you just call it usering, because that sounds really weird, but that's more akin to it. That we aren't an audience anymore, because audience is a mass consuming a singular text. We're actually masses consuming entirely different content on the same platforms. Content which has been curated for us algorithmically, as I've already demonstrated. I'm back to this guy. I'm sure Sarah talked about Stuart Hall extensively with you in MS-200. Hall's ideas on how audiences work can tell us a lot about how YouTube operates. The classic model of linear communication was we had a sender, medium, and receiver, right? Hall's model changed that, so meanings are encoded and then decoded, and lots of different factors shape those processes at either end of the communication spectrum. Basically, as social media users, we encode information into our content, and we're constantly in a state of decoding information as well that we receive. And that, we need to add another part of the loop. Because when we are considering platforms like TikTok, YouTube, but we can extend this to Facebook and Instagram as well, and all these other things that we use. When we decode, that then becomes part of the encoding process in turn. As we are decoding messages and understanding what is going on social media, we are encoding that understanding back into the content that we produce afterwards. So this process effectively becomes a feedback loop. We are continually producing things and encoding meaning in them, and then we are decoding the meanings that other people give to us. And we are then using that information back. It becomes a circular motion, rather than the way Hall showed it, because remember, Hall was talking about a very different media landscape. Hall is talking in the broadcast age, where literally something is pushed at you. You can't push back. So you simply have an encoding process, and then you decode as a member of an audience. As users, we take the decoding of text that we do and encode them back into the stuff that we produce. Therefore producing, I don't know if Sarah talked about this in MS-200. She mentioned the word cybernetics. I see some nods. Can anyone tell me anything about cybernetics, seeing as you were educated so comprehensively in the topic before Christmas? Go on, kid.
Is it basically just like feedback loops? It's like
Yeah,
the way that
perfect. You don't have to go any further. Cybernetics is, I have been for 30 years been fascinated by cybernetics, right? But cybernetics basically means a feedback loop in a system. The people who were the first proponents of cybernetics, people like Claude Shannon, J.R. Linkleiter, people like this, they were interested in how things flow around in a closed network. How does information get used and reused? And the core fundamental thing to understand in cybernetics is, where is the feedback loop? When something happens, how is that information reused? And what they wanted to understand is how humans and computers interact. Where do the feedback loops exist? And most early cybernetic work, feedback loops exist within the human user. You know, we operate machinery or computers in a particular way. We learn lessons from it, and that informs how we do it the next time. And we become part of this networked infrastructure because we are continually feeding back into the system. For want of a better way of putting it, this is a cybernetic loop. Social media differs from traditional broadcast media because traditional broadcast media didn't give us the means of feedback. It didn't give us the cybernetic element. Whereas we're part of the system and we are decoding information and then encoding that information in the things that we do afterwards. That didn't exist previously. Now, this system is no longer a line, it is a circle. So you will also be familiar with Stuart Hall's idea that we have three different kinds of reading of things. I think this is really problematic in Stuart Hall. I think the idea that there's just three ways of doing it is really quite difficult. But you have a preferred reading, an oppositional reading, and a negotiated reading. So, preferred reading affirms the hegemonic order. You agree with it. Negotiated reading, you agree with some stuff, you don't agree with other stuff. Oppositional reading, this is shit. You know? Those are the modes of decoding that we have in social media effectively. Some stuff we like, with a preferred reading of it. What do we do with that stuff? What happens on TikTok when you get a massive preferred reading? Somebody puts out something on TikTok. How do we know there's a preferred reading of it?
Likes,
Yeah, likes, views,
Shares,
shares,
some comments.
some comments. Anything else? On TikTok.
Saved.
Saved, yeah.
You see it? Like it's get pushed up.
See it? Everyone's missing the elephant in the room here.
That you can
On-
get the
on
same engagement
TikTok.
from an oppositional reading.
Yeah, I guess.
If somebody really dislikes something, it can go viral and get the same kind
guess.
of engagement. Probably not likes, but you will definitely get comments instead on content that is received very
I don't
negatively.
disagree. Thank you. Becomes a trend. Everyone does the same fucking thing. We know this happens, right? You know, where something is done, and then all of a sudden, you are seeing it over and over and over and over again. Like this week, with that fucking clip of Nicolas Cage turning around to that guy from The Mandalorian who's just smiling. So people have seen this, right? Yeah. What do you mean, no? What? I don't know why you're watching on TikTok. Nobody's seen this? Yeah, thank you. Okay, yeah. So you got Nicolas Cage with this mean look on his face. You got that annoying music playing in the background. There's the Mandalorian guy just fucked up. And I'm seeing it like 40 times a day. That music is playing when I'm in the shower and my phone is downstairs. It's happening in my head. This is bad. Third readings, we know when they happen because they create trends. Oppositional readings still occur. Yeah, you get, bite back. People will contribute to something, very often in stitches or in duets where, they will be completely disagreeing with what's going on. Negotiated readings mix the two. Our decoding styles are here for us to see. So, we are engaged in this. What we need to ask ourselves is, Hall was particularly interested in hegemony and the idea of dominant ideas in society. Hegemony being when the dominant ideas of a ruling class in society are accepted as common sense, according to Gramsci's original formation of what hegemony was in the 1920s. I've only put YouTube here, but does YouTube or TikTok challenge the hegemonic order? When you have a cultural phenomena like this, we need to understand how does it sit within the wider structures of power in society. And for me, TikTok does not challenge these dominant ideas or ideas of a dominant economic class. In fact, it reinforces many of the dominant ideas that occur within society. TikTok is a commercial platform. As I already illustrated in some of the statistics earlier, it is a fundamentally commercial platform. Huge amounts of money are being spent on products which are advertised through this platform. Much of the content produced is paid for content. Even though it might not be positioned as such, it is content, content providers are creating, for want of a better term, advertising content for us to consume. If I ever get a tweet about a fucking air fryer again, not a tweet, a TikTok about an air, I don't want an air fryer. Leave me alone. I don't care about air fryers. If I wanted an air fryer, I would have an air fryer. Fuck off with your air fryer. Every day, air fryer. I get air fryer, people cooking things in air fryers. I don't own an air fryer. Somebody out there wants me to own an air fryer.
Yeah.
Okay? Somebody out there thinks, here's loser, 43 years old, lives on his own, motherfucker needs an air fryer. Okay? That is what's going on here, okay? So, to what extent do these platforms challenge hegemony is interesting, because we tend to focus on what we see on the platforms. However, there is equally much to be gained from what we don't see, or indeed what is not made visible on these platforms. Now, as I've alluded to, TikTok is owned by a Chinese company. And as you said, Will, Chinese companies have a complex relationship with the Chinese state. Therefore, if I were to produce a series of TikToks about aspects of the Chinese state and the Chinese Communist Party which were not favourable, what do you think TikTok does with that?
Censors.
Maybe not outright removal, but I can't imagine it would get much traction.
It's not appear in many places. And there are people who get banned for this kind of stuff as well. Very often what you will see in sensitive information on TikTok is the story that you have been banned for violation of community guidelines. Yeah? There isn't really any explanation given beyond that, like how have you violated community guidelines? Because the community guidelines are not, on most platforms, are actually not very well defined at all. This is an easy catch-all for social networks to ban any content that comes along that becomes politically sensitive that they can't anticipate. So, I suspect I would be banned for violating community guidelines. It wouldn't be made clear to me what I've done or what I've said. I suspect nobody, or maybe one or two people might have complained about the content, and that will be enough to do that. The content that is pushed is shaped, contentious, difficult, politically sensitive, doesn't get shared. Interestingly, contentious, racist, that might well get shared. Why? Why is somebody being overtly racist more acceptable to a social network than somebody being politically contentious?
I feel like, because you're not, if you're being like racist or transphobic or something, you're not really challenging like the basis of like.
Well, I would argue you're not challenging the hegemonic order.
Yeah.
if states are, there's a reason why you have to change laws for things, right? But I mean, maybe I'm being a little bit unfair. I don't want to stand here and say like the state is racist. It doesn't quite map on in that way anyway. There is a more fundamental reason why you would keep content like that, as opposed to my, probably very highly informed and theoretical discussions of, benefits of a mercantile state like China. Why would you let racist, sexist, transphobic content remain on your network?
Divides people, strengthens the hegemony order.
It may well do that. It could well do that, but it has to do something first in order to do that.
It also increases interaction because in controversial arguments.
Thank you.
Anger and fear.
It increases interaction. Remember what I was saying, I think last week? Emotionally significant content increases interaction. There's a reason why Facebook doesn't get rid of white supremacists. Why? A lot of people click on white supremacy stuff. I'm not saying people are white supremacists to do that. A lot of people who are opposed to that political view will also engage with it. It's a driver of traffic. If you get, this is why, every now and again, well, on a fairly regular cycle, because all of these things are designed cycles, right? I'll get some content about, Karens being racist in America. Well, whoopee-doo. There are racist people that live in America. Strike me down. There are racist people that live in every country. Why am I getting this content? Because I'll engage with it. Even if it's only to the extent that I've got to watch this to the end because I can't believe this woman said that. Well, I'm watching till the end, you know? I'm engaged. Is it a challenge to the hegemonic order? No. It's a reinforcement of the basic idea of contemporary capitalism that attention is everything. These things don't challenge the hegemonic order, they shape it. That anything goes as long as it generates traffic. The stuff that don't generate traffic is the stuff that's likely to get buried. These platforms challenge, most importantly, the notion of the audience. I don't believe this morning I was watching TikTok. I was doing something more than watching. I was engaged with it in a way where I'm thinking about, shall I comment? Shall I like? Watch is passive. When we watch something, we are taking the role of an observer in it. On it, sorry, I should say. This is why, despite the fact that it's nearly 3 o'clock on a Friday and everyone in this room looks like they are ready to die, this is a vastly superior thing than watching that recording. Because to watch is simply to sit in a passive way. We don't engage in the same way. And, you know, even if you're being quite passive in the room right now, at least you're here and you can dip in and out of what I'm saying. When you're watching, that's much harder to do. So engagement of any principle is usually a better thing for learning. So to take it out of that context, do we even watch anymore? I don't think we do. Now, we're not... the best way of thinking about this is perhaps hyperactive audiences, but what I'd prefer people to do is get rid of the word audience altogether. And it really knocks me off how this remains a word which people think is important. You know, I've colleagues who talk about, oh, we got amazing audience for our website. So what are you talking about? Audience implies that you've got a bunch of people sitting around doing the same thing. All these people are accessing this at different times for different purposes, doing different things with it. This isn't an audience, this isn't a passive thing which is receiving information. We don't do that anymore. This is why television is fundamentally problematic in this day and age. It's not something it's not a format anymore or a medium which appeals to people. I don't like watching television anymore. It gives me the ick because I start to get antsy. And after about 10 minutes, I have to get my phone and do something. It's fucking boring. I'm not doing all the things that I'm used to do. I can't sit there for that long. I can do it in a cinema because it's that environment, right, where you're like sat and you're positioned in a particular way, and I've got loads of caffeine and I've got, you know, loads of sugar and I'm cool. But television operates in a different way. I think we should forget this word. Treat it as a historical thing. When we think about social media in particular, to use the word audience is a big, big mistake. Well, if you're talking about, like, you know, a tweet has this many people, you know, it has an audience for it. That's not how it worked. It wasn't broadcast at the same time to all of these people. It didn't happen that way. I guess the best way of thinking about it is an audience isn't selected. Okay? You hope to get an audience for a television show or a film or a newspaper or a radio show, but you don't pick who those people are. TikTok picks who those people are. It's direct in that way, in a way that audience isn't. So I've left Will's stuff about diffusion of audience here, but this might be something that you want to play around with in what your project or essay, but keep in mind, if somebody said like audience in an essay, something like that, I'm not going to mark it down for it, okay? But what I would do is encourage you to think differently about it going forwards. Okay.
So is it user instead of audience?
User instead of audience. I would always talk about user, yeah.
Or data.
I mean, user's not an unproblematic term. It's kind of dehumanizing. Audience is kind of dehumanizing as well, but I think user is a little bit dehumanizing. It reduces us down to a particular set of actions, which isn't great, but I still think it's better than the idea that we just sit and passively take stuff in, you know, that we are actually using it in a way to fulfill our own needs and desires as well. You know? Okay, so some of the thinking on what I call social television in the past has been radically misguided. Henry Jenkins wrote in 2009, 4 years after YouTube started, that YouTube pushes content which receives support from other users. His idea was that YouTube was a really egalitarian network. If you made something and people liked it, then it would swell in popularity. Other people would watch and so on. This is like almost like an organic, ground-up way of creating new media content which is popular, right? Rather than networks deciding, we're going to make this show and we're going to put it out this time with these people in, so we're going to get all of these people to watch it. You know, so decisions are made on it. Jenkins thought that YouTube actually was much more like, you know, the town square analogy. You know, somebody speaks, loads of people like it, people start to follow it. You know, it gains popularity. Unsurprisingly, like most of the things that Henry Jenkins writes, this is complete and utter bollocks from beginning to end. Jenkins completely misunderstood what was going on with YouTube, and indeed he misunderstands what's going on with most social media. Partially that is true, and there was, and still is, phenomena of the YouTuber. You know, a ground up, you know, sort of YouTube creator that generates a huge amount of traffic and becomes very wealthy because of that traffic that they've generated. That does exist. But the vast amount of content on YouTube that is visible is content made by media companies. One of the things that we have to be really careful about when we think about YouTube and TikTok is who is making that stuff and where is the most visible stuff coming from. We misunderstand these networks, these platforms, and we understand in the way that, you know, TikTok are the most popular people are people who are, you know, like you or I, and they've become popular. Actually, the statistics don't back that up at all. Most popular content is stuff which is produced by major media companies. Most popular content, what is the most, can anyone tell me what the most watched video on YouTube is? It's profoundly depressing. I think this might have been overtaken, but does anyone ever know the answer to this?
Is it Baby Shark?
This is, I suspect it now is Baby
God.
Shark. Prior to that, do you know what it was? Go back a little further.
Gangnam Style.
Yes.
Oh my god.
Yeah. That for many years was the most viewed video on YouTube. I mean, I can't think of a greater indictment of contemporary society than that. Bring on nuclear war, if that's what people are watching, okay? Bring it on. Because I can't think of anything darker than billions of people watching Gangnam Style. Nothing makes me want to curl into the fetal position and cry more than that idea, okay? That's what's being consumed in vast amounts. It isn't my lecture videos which go up on YouTube. Nobody is consuming that shit, despite the wonderful array of ideas that are on play and the interplay with the audience, which is quite magnificent at times. Nobody's watching this stuff. Sucks to be them. The content which actually gets consumed is, by and large, professionally made content. It is content constructed by corporate media. So, who is actually capturing our attention? It is this. basically we have these giant companies who were big in the broadcast era, now being big in the digital era as well, producing the same kind of stuff. So, has anything changed here? I mean, I don't know. The original ideas around this was that YouTube was going to be a site for the production and distribution of grassroots media, and then participation occurs on this. Yes, we can create our own content, and we do create our own content, but that content is not the stuff that gains traction. The stuff that gains traction is the stuff which has been produced in the traditional mode, if you like. Adapted for these new platforms, but nevertheless is still produced in the traditional manner. The reason why Jenkins gets this wrong is because Jenkins has no idea about politics. So Henry Jenkins, although being really important, participatory culture is a really important idea. What Henry Jenkins has a problem with is he can't understand that politics is all about the interrelationship between corporations and other corporations. Google owns YouTube, for example. YouTube is in a commercial relationship with just about every other company. They buy advertising space and advertising capital off YouTube. So the most popular YouTube videos come from Universal, Sony, Disney. Well, guess who's a business partner of Google? Them. Jenkins doesn't think in these terms. He thinks it's like a giant playground for our ideas. This idea goes for all social media. Every social media network works in this way. Jenkins is basically wrong again. Now, I'm going to skip a little bit here and talk about this at the end. Streaming culture. So, streaming culture should be thought of as both a noun and a verb. There is a streaming culture, noun, but also streaming culture is something we do. Culture is something we enact. It is a verb as well. Raymond Williams, probably the most famous and most influential Welsh academic of all time. Raymond Williams argued in the 1970s that culture is ordinary. If there is a culture of something, then it is an ordinary part of everyday life. And therefore, if there is a streaming culture, it is an ordinary part of our everyday lives. It happens without us thinking about it. It is not something we examine all the time simply because it is part of what we do. There is a constant relationship between cultural consumption, production, representation, identity, and regulation. These things are happening all the time. And because they're happening all the time in real time, we don't even think about it. We exist in streaming culture, yet it is not something that we concern ourselves with. Simply because we are in the middle of it at all points. It is something which occurs around us. Therefore, if something is a culture like this, it is an ordinary, everyday part of our lives. It is not something extraordinary. For Dave Arditi, there are two kinds of streaming culture. What we consume and the culture we identify in that consumption itself. So, for example, he uses this example. The culture of watching Friends on Netflix in 2021 is very different to when I was watching it on Channel 4 in 1994. Culturally, these are very, very different things. Streaming culture here is very different. What you're consuming might be the same text, but the culture in which we identify that consumption is totally different. I remember Friends being on telly in 1994 when it first came on. Whoopie-doo. Great to be me. Does anyone watch Friends on Netflix? I'm not going to have a go on anyone. It's a very popular program. And it is funny. But nobody's going to put their hand down. How many episodes of Friends would you watch, typically, in a session where you were watching the program?
I don't remember how many, but probably at least 3, 4 if I had the time to.
Okay.
Because I wanted to finish it and I did.
So, How many do you think I watched on tally in 1994? When it was
One a
on?
week.
One a week. Yeah. That's how it worked. Culturally, because of that, culturally, the programme was entirely different. You would watch one episode, and then you would talk to people about that episode. And then the next week, watch the next episode, talk about it, and it became like this thing, where, you know, momentum generates over time. Now, the culture of Friends is expressed not through that kind of one-off, everyone consuming at the same point in time, so everyone is on the same page. Instead, that culture is expressed in a number of different ways. People express their cultural affinity with Friends with buying T-shirts that say Central Perk, or, you know, buying I don't know, a coffee cup that's got the logo on it or something like this, yeah? Because the cultural form in which it's being consumed in has changed over time. So, streaming culture doesn't just involve the stuff that's streamed, it's about how it's streamed as well. Now, Arditi argues that we're always consuming culture, so there's a consumption, and because of that, there is a commodification. As we consume culture, we're always being commodified for it as well. In the streaming age, that means we're in a new part of capitalism, unending consumption. We can never stop consuming. Theoretically, in the past, there was a point to which you stopped. You know, the programme ended. The television station went off for the night. When I was a kid, television stopped. Fucked up as that sounds, it stopped. Like about midnight every night, they would play the national anthem of both Wales and Britain, and then telly stopped. You're looking at me like I'm making this shit up, it's true. It's absolutely true, all right? And then after about half an hour, they would put some shit on, like Open University, where some beardy guy would talk about fucking physics or some shit for hours, and you'd want to kill yourself, right? It was not a good time. This is, honestly, this happened, right? This did genuinely happen. That world is gone. We are now plugged into systems and loops of unending consumption. So when you subscribe to something like Spotify, for example, you provide companies with constant and consistent consumption of their product. We're always consuming something. Ubiquitous mobile access to individualized media is what we get. What we are telling the subscribers, the company you subscribe to, is, I am going to consume. I am going to do this. In fact, usually if you pay a subscription, they don't care. You know, I in the summer, because of the cost of living crisis, I looked at all the subscriptions I had. It's like, I subscribed to Paramount. I was like, oh, what was I even I didn't even know I was subscribed to them. It was going out of my account every month. I was like, what the fuck? It wasn't even installed on most of the things I've got. It's like, I was subscribed to Disney. So why was this? What the? I fucking hate Disney. How have I got a subscription to Disney? So I cancelled loads of these things because I was subscribed to stuff I didn't even remember subscribing to. It was ridiculous. Doesn't matter. I was still going into this system.